All right, Sergio.
Hello.
Sergio, where are you from originally? Where'd you grow up?
Originally, I was born in South America. Came to the United States when I was very young. Touched down in Aurora, Colorado, and then grew up there to the age of fourth grade, and then came here to Los Angeles.
But you're not Latin American. You are.
Full Korean. Just have the Spanish first name because there's like this tradition in my family where all the males get like Hispanic first names. Like my dad's name was Antonio, my uncle's name was Roberto, so I guess they named me Sergio. Yeah.
But you're not Hispanic.
Not Hispanic, just full Korean.
Got it. And how would you describe your childhood?
I would say my childhood was pretty normal up until the fourth grade. Even though I did have some stuff happen to me pre fifth grade because I had some nasty things happen to me from my cousins that I don't really want to get into too much. I also ha I was raised the only child, so that was pretty tough. Pretty lonely most of the time, and when I came to Los Angeles, is when it got really weird, for sure.
With what I mean, just be vague about like sexual abuse.
Yeah, we could say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what kind of kid were you in high school?
In high school, I was already struggling. So up until fourth grade, I was getting pretty good grades. And then once I got to middle school, I started struggling, not with the academics, but really just paying attention. And I was just had a really hard time just sitting down. And by the time I hit high school, I already dropped out by freshman year because I was having a really hard time just, with school in general. It just really wasn't really for me.
You finished high school though.
I didn't. I got a GED.
Okay.
Yeah, so I didn't get the diploma, but I got a GED while I was incarcerated.
What for?
But at that time, I was for a commercial burglary, and that was in my juvenile years.
Were there drugs involved in your life then?
Yeah, for sure, because I was already doing drugs by the time I was like 15 years old. Yeah.
How'd you first get introduced?
So basically, I was self-medicating because in high school, I was going through this breakup, and I didn't really have anybody to talk to about my relationship issues because, well, I had a language barrier with my mom. I was growing up here. I couldn't really speak Korean that well, and she didn't speak English too well. So I had a hard time. And while I was going through this breakup, I started experimenting with weed, started smoking it pretty heavily. Eventually, moved on to stuff like ecstasy, cocaine, and then eventually landed on methamphetamine.
That was your main drug.
Main drug of choice for sure, methamphetamine and Xanax.
In your childhood, back to that, is the stereotypical Asian or Korean family you wouldn't picture a drug addict being in the family.
No, I didn't expect it at all because, like I said, I had a pretty normal childhood, but after fifth grade, not really. Because what happened was my mom and my dad were in the picture, and then when I went to middle school, my dad suffered an injury at the workplace, and he had to be hospitalized in Colorado. So when he was in Colorado, I was living with my mom alone here, and she was a single mother. I'm the only child. She's at work most of the time, so she couldn't really control me. And while I was just doing my thing, there was no supervision. My dad wasn't in the picture anymore, and I was the only child, and I was just doing whatever I wanted, basically.
And that's where some of the abuse came.
The abuse,
That's where the abuse kind of snuck in.
for drug abuse.
No, the sexual abuse.
No, 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 no. The sexual abuse was when I was a child.
Yeah, but that's not typical for an Asian family, or is it? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know, because like a lot of families don't really want to talk about stuff that goes down when it comes to like uncles or cousins. And I thought it was strange, but I didn't know how strange it was until I got older. And I never really spoke about this to anybody before, so it's kind of like getting to me a little bit. I'm like feeling the pressure right now, but yeah, the sexual abuse, and then this is pretty insignificant, but when I was a child, I had a bike stolen from me, and after that, I started stealing stuff too for no reason. Even though I had stuff, my mom was buying me the things I needed. I had generally had everything I needed to grow up properly, but for some reason I started just taking things that weren't mine. I started stealing stuff from school. I came back. My mom would find this set of dice that I stole, and she beat me up for it, beat my butt for it, but I guess I never learned my lesson, and I guess that's why I eventually ended up in juvenile hall and LA County Jail because of me stealing stuff.
You think that was just some form of acting out from what you were?
Yeah, I believe it was some sort of acting out because by the time I got here to LA, I'm not gonna say that we were poor, but my mom was definitely, struggling being a single parent here in LA, and we didn't have much. I'm not gonna say we had nothing, but it was just the typical living in Koreatown.
Your parents separated, or your dad?
So my dad, when he got hospitalized, they weren't completely separated. But the reason why he went back to Colorado was because that's where his side of the family was. And at the time, my mom is here alone. There's no family here besides my mom and my uncle. So my dad had to get family support. They weren't broken up though. They were still together at the time. But eventually they drifted apart from being separated for so long because my dad never got better after he got that injury, and he eventually passed away, and that's kind of what made my drug use go from casual to like completely off the walls.
You don't hear of a whole lot of Asians, like here on Skid Row. You don't see, like I've seen maybe 3 Asian people in the 12 years I've spent down here, almost 13 years.
13 years.
There's not a whole lot of Asians that are involved in drugs, but I mean, what's been your experience?
So getting to Skid Row was definitely a journey. It didn't just happen overnight. I was doing the drugs. I eventually left my house when I was 18 years old. So what happened was I got incarcerated for that commercial burglary, went to juvenile hall, did 8 months, got out of camp. But while I was in camp, my dad had passed away. And my mom didn't tell me that. And when I got out, she said, "Hey, I didn't want to tell you this while you were in jail, but your dad passed away. And while you were in, and he couldn't come, So that hit me really hard, and I turned 18 in camp, so by the time I got out, I was ready to just be free and be an 18-year-old kid, but my mom hit me with the news that my dad had just died and that we had to go to a funeral. And I'm not gonna lie, I did not go to the funeral. I wasn't ready to face whatever emotions that I had to face, and that is when I started shooting meth, because up until that point I was only smoking it. And when I found out that my dad had passed and I hit the streets, and I just wanted to get as messed up and high as I could, and I've seeked out this acquaintance I knew that already was dabbling with shooting up and intravenous use, and I had him come by and he showed me how to do it, and that pretty much started the speed run to Skid Row. I was homeless, left my mom's house, living on the streets, couch surfing, living in abandoned apartments or sleeping on the subways, and just pretty much always losing my stuff because people would go through my pockets while I was asleep in public. So that's the one reason why I really liked meth, because I didn't have to sleep at night, because I could literally just find a place to sleep during the day, which is generally a little bit safer, like homeless centers, drop-in centers. And then I would just try to stay up at night as best as I could, because that was when it was really dangerous, especially here in Skid Row. But
your drug use kind of stemmed from trying to deal with
my dad passing, my relationship issues. I just never dealt with my emotions. And eventually it just snowballed and snowballed. And the reason why I ended up on Skid Row in the first place was because there was a needle exchange here. And there was no way for me to actually get clean or new needles because I was homeless and an addict. So I would come here to Skid Row, and I met this other Asian guy. His name was Brandon. I'm not gonna say his last name, but he's the one that showed me the needle exchange. And that's when I started kind of just hanging out around here because it was the most convenient. The cops weren't really bothering me, and that's just how it went.
You can sleep anywhere you like.
Sleep anywhere I like, no one really bothering me too much. And it was definitely an eye-opening experience. I used to like go inside of these like porta potty, those metal porta potties that have the sliding doors, and just do my business in there and come out and just, do my thing. And yeah.
Your life has changed a lot since then, though.
Oh, drastically. Let me.
How many years were you living like that?
So I was on the street since 18. For sure, I was doing it for at least 2 years straight, because I didn't get incarcerated until I was about 20 years old. Because while I was out on the streets, I needed money, and I committed a residential burglary, and that landed me in jail. That actually got a strike for it. I got a felony on my record for that. And when I got out, they were supposed to send me to prison, but instead, I told them, look, I have a problem, I need help. And they sent me to a rehab. So long story short, I left that rehab, relapsed again, and then got locked up. They gave me a second chance, went back to rehab, finished the program, graduated, got off probation, got a regular job, one of my first regular paying jobs, and just started working a regular 9 to 5, and then met my wife, and a lot of things have changed.
What do you credit those changes to?
While I was in rehab and just going through the months, and I slowly started to just have things of my own. I got my license, I saved up for a car, I had my own clothes, and they were telling me about an apartment program, so I was like, wow. So as soon as I started getting these things that I could call my own, it motivated me to see how far I could go with it. Eventually got my apartment, and of course, I still relapsed after I got clean, but I feel like that's a part of recovery, and as long as you don't slip back into it, it's all that matters.
But was there therapy involved or anything like that?
No, so there was not much therapy involved.
Because you had a lot of emotional baggage to
emotional
process.
baggage for sure. So that's where. So the rehab that I went to, they were very work centric, and they had us doing a lot of labor and keeping us busy. And I'm not sure that is exactly what I needed, but it worked. And I pretty much learned how to hold down a stable job and work hard and be grateful for what I had. But I want to say I was really just sick and tired of being on the streets. And I was really relieved to just have finally found just a normal life that I could live, and just try to stick to it. I cannot forget to give my mom some credit, because she's the one that showed up to every court date. She continued to support me through rehab, and without her, I don't know where I would be, for sure.
It's usually what it takes is just being fed up with your own BS.
Yeah, it takes, and you know what? Sometimes a lot of people don't hit rock bottom and I feel like you really need to hit rock bottom in order to wake up. But what's scary is that I feel like, I'm not trying to get political or anything, but I feel like they make it kind of hard for you to actually hit rock bottom here in America. I don't know if that's going to be controversial to say, but
Because they give out clothing, food, housing.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's a
needle
bad
exchange, all that stuff.
Yeah. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because yeah, sure, harm reduction and everything, but it makes it kind of comfortable, not comfortable, but a little bit easier to
You can't even get arrested for using
right
your drug in open.
Yeah, and it's just like I'm not gonna disclose why, but I don't qualify for certain things like EBT and food stamps and welfare and stuff. So that pretty much like accelerated my sick and tiredness. But I feel like a lot of people do have a lot of things here, even when you're homeless. And
and the government support.
Government support.
The what do they call it? GR.
GR?
Government relief.
Government relief, okay.
And all the food stamps and all the things that they're handing out regularly.
Right, and I'm not trying to say that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't take care of these people. It's just what I've noticed for myself was that if I had those things, I don't know if I would have woken up so soon. I mean, yes, I'm still young. I'm 26 years old. And I'm glad that I got sober before it's too late, because there's some irreversible damages that could happen. And I feel like I really dodged the bullet for sure.
You got away from fentanyl.
I got away from fentanyl, yeah. So when I was doing drugs,
fentanyl wasn't around when you were.
that was not a thing. I didn't even know what that was, you know? And like nowadays when I walk around, when I drove here, I saw a lot of people slumped out and just like sitting down or in their tents. Back when I was in Skid Row, everybody was moving around, because I feel like 8 out of the 10 people were high on either some type of amphetamine or not fentanyl. And it just seems like,
There used to be heroin, crack, and maybe speed.
right, now it's just all fentanyl.
And now it's 80%
80%.
at least 80% fentanyl.
It's wild to see, and it's a scary time, because it's not just the people that are here that are affected, it's everybody. It could be in your cocaine bag, it can be in a pill. I had a friend die last month from taking this pill, and it was fentanyl.
Yeah.
And it's just
No, it's in pills. I've heard they're even lacing pot with it now.
pot. Wow, I did not hear about that.
Heard
But
it. I mean, yeah, who knows?
yeah, no, it's a scary time to be an addict for sure.
You have Asian friends?
I do have Asian friends.
Are drugs kind of a thing with them? Or
Oh yeah, yeah. So when I was growing up in Koreatown, everybody was on some type of ecstasy or cocaine, party drugs. Methamphetamine, not so much. It kind of had like a stigma, like, oh, you're smoking meth. But it's like there was a lot of stimulants involved. Asians, they love raves and stuff like that. So I mean, ecstasy was definitely a thing. And I've watched some of my friends and people that I knew go down the same path as me. And they're part of the reason that intrigued me about it was there is this one Korean rehab in Koreatown, and I think it's like the only Korean rehab, and it's a faith-based like a service, and they pretty much have you do Christian stuff, Bible studies and stuff like that. But when one of my friends got there, she had mentioned that there was people there that have been there for 8 to 10 years. And it's like, okay, you know, that's a good thing. Sure, you've been sober for 8 to 10 years, but I feel like at some point there needs to be like a transition for them to move back into society. And there's not a lot of that, because in the Asian community, people want to act like drug use doesn't exist. And it's almost like completely frowned upon, and you don't want to bring up that you have a drug problem, because I don't know if a lot of first generation, second generation Asian parents would understand before just kicking them out completely or disowning them, because it's just so strict. And I was blessed to have a mom that was not really like that. But I've watched a lot of my friends go through homelessness and getting kicked out of the house or leaving the house because the parents aren't going to seek help for their kids. Or not saying all parents are going to do that, but a lot of Asian parents are pretty hard on them, very strict, you know, kick them to the curb, learn your hard lessons, whatever the case is, right?
What would you say was your lowest point when you were using?
My lowest point was when I snuck back into my mom's apartment, but she had already moved out, and she told me that I couldn't come back. I snuck back in, and there was this abandoned unit in the basement where like the worker kept all of his like work stuff. And I slept down there for a couple of days, and it was super dusty in there, so I got really dirty. I shaved my head, I was completely bald, and I pretty much burned all my bridges at that point, because I was stealing from whoever, and it didn't matter whether if it was friends or whether if it was people I didn't know. And I burned all my bridges. And at that point, I felt extra alone. My mom was not helping me out, and I had no friends, and I was just trying to figure it out. And I feel like being alone in your addiction is probably one of the worst things you can do, because then you just sink deeper and deeper with no one to tell
Your
you.
behavior changes so drastically that you just become alienated from everyone.
Exactly. And I just felt like an outcast. And you know, I did say that I had a lot of friends that did drugs, like my Asian friends, but there were a lot of Asian friends that went to college, universities, and I seen the Facebook pictures, and you just see that stuff and you just feel like a complete failure. And you just like thinking like, man, like these are people, my peers, and they're out here, you know, UCLA, USC, UC Irvine, and I'm just here, you know, and that was a hard pill to swallow, feeling like I had essentially fallen back and felt like I was in a rat race that I couldn't ever get ahead on. And getting to Skid Row, sleeping on the streets was definitely one of my lowest moments for sure. Before then, it was relatively okay because I had like couches to sleep on and stuff, but yeah. I would say my darkest by far would be the last 2 months before getting incarcerated for the residential burglary, because I was already aware that I had a warrant for my arrest, because there's a long story behind that residential burglary. Well, basically, okay, I already told the story before, but I will tell it again. So how this residential burglary went down was, I was dating this girl at the time. Before I met this girl, my friend of mine told me, hey, I want to go burglarize this house. So I said, sure, let's go. Once we finished up with that, we did our thing, we got out. I didn't know the owner of the house. And then 2 or 3 months later, I meet this chick and we started talking. A mutual friend introduced us, and turns out that chick's ex-boyfriend was the house that I had burglarized. And she started putting 2 and 2 together, but I never really told her anything definitive. And eventually, I don't know exactly what happened to this day, but all of a sudden, they had alerted her that there was a felony warrant for my arrest, and she told me that they were looking for me. And that's when I was like extremely paranoid, and essentially it felt like a drug-induced schizophrenic episode. I was hearing voices, and I felt like everybody was looking at me when they drove by, and it was just, I feel like it was like the closest thing to a psychotic break, for sure.
Now that you're clean and you've been clean for a while, do you look back at that part of your life and just wonder how you got there?
Yeah, no, I think back and it almost doesn't feel real. It almost feels like a dream, and it feels like it didn't happen. But when I look back at it now, it almost all makes sense. Like the whole relationship thing, not being able to talk to my parents. I understand what happened. I'm just grateful to be here now, doing this interview with you, with my good health, and things to look forward to.
Yeah, I'm glad you're doing better.
Thank you.
Sergio, what would you say is the most important lesson you've learned after all of this?
The most important lesson that I've learned through all of this is to stay focused on whatever it is that you're doing, and even if you're not seeing results right away in whatever it is that you're doing, just to be aware that things are coming as long as you stay focused and on the right path. And I feel like a lot of these blessings that I have now wouldn't have came if I didn't just stay focused and stay on the right path. Because now I'm getting to work one of my dream careers. And
what are you doing now?
I'm doing what you do, brother, but not on the scale of what you do. And that's part of the reason why your channel intrigued me so much, because I started a YouTube channel because I felt like I went through the things that I went through because I needed to tell my story. And I took all my stories to YouTube, finding little success in it, nowhere near yours, like I said, but it's just a blessing that I'm able to make most of my money on a platform that I've watched since I was a kid. I grew up watching YouTube. I didn't have cable, so I was really an internet kid. And just when I came across your channel and I saw what you were doing as far as like the addict interviews and giving these essentially faceless people a voice, it resonated with me, because that's something that I wanted to do for addicts, but of like not just Asians, but I wanted to highlight the addictions that Asian people face and that what a lot of people don't talk about.
Excellent. Sergio, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Of course.
I'm glad you're doing better.
Thank you.
And stay on track.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, man.